I'm Linus Sandgren, and you're listening to the Cinematography podcast.
The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Hey, Ben. Welcome to another episode of the Cinematography podcast.
Cinepod, we sometimes call it.
We do. It's short. It's sweet. You know, it's easy to find on Facebook. It's Facebook/Cinepod. So yeah, that's Zipier. It works.
Zipier. Do you regret that we didn't call it Cinepod from the beginning?
You know, I think people might have felt deceived not knowing what this is, but but at the same time, we registered that on Facebook immediately, and it seemed like a nice short URL. But then, life happened, and we thought Cinematography podcast. Yeah, that'll work.
People are always like, what's your cinematography podcast called? And I'm like, it's called the Cinematography podcast. So who do we have on the show this week?
Returning to the show is Linus Sandgren, who, of course, shot the latest James Bond film, No Time to Die.
And also, Don't Look Up.
That's right. And also Don't Look Up. That's true.
Two movies, and we get into this in the interview, that could not possibly look less like one another. They are so vastly different in their look, in their approach, in their visual approach, and it's hard to believe the same extraordinarily talented guy shot them both. But he was amazing, and it was cool to talk to him about making both of those movies. And I don't know, I kind of don't want to favor one over the other. They're just both so interesting, and everyone has already seen James Bond probably. If you haven't seen Don't Look Up, it's on Netflix, and definitely worth your time. Great cast, really biting satire. Love it.
Hey, Ben, I think before we get too far into close focus or anything else, I think we should do a little bit of fan mail. We got a really great bit of fan mail here that I'm going to do my best to try to give a truncated, sort of extracted, because it's a pretty long email here, but it turns out that a longtime listener in Bulgaria, who is a graduate of the local film academy a few years ago, has been so inspired by our podcast that he has started his own cinematography podcast in Bulgaria. Yes. Isn't that awesome?
That's cool.
He writes that a few years ago, as a student, he was shooting a children's football league. And by football, I'm sure he means soccer. And he says the matches were unbearably boring. I've seen some kids' soccer. I have an understanding of what that might be.
I might have seen some kids' soccer yesterday, so yeah.
And he says the only way he didn't die of boredom, apart from the cold and heat in the different seasons, was the fact that he had the opportunity to listen to your interviews with Matthew Libatique and Wally Pfister. He says, you have an extremely fun and exciting way of hosting the show. And
thank you.
Then he goes on to explain, where Bulgaria is, assuming that we just have no understanding of it. But anyway, I actually...
Could I put it on a map? No. Do I roughly know where it is? Sort of.
Well, anyway, he's started interviewing local directors of photography and has a whole list of all the people he's done who've worked on these major productions. And a lot of Hollywood films have been going to Bulgaria to shoot recently. And actually, I know one major lens manufacturer who makes cinema lenses in Bulgaria. So it's like they have a different name on them that doesn't represent Bulgaria. It's a German brand, but anyway, made in Bulgaria. And anyway, he says, be healthy, invite more cool guests, and stay on focus. Some practical advice about hosting a podcast will be more than welcome. So I don't know what sort of practical advices we can give, but
I have the same advice I give everyone who's thinking about podcasting, and that's ready, fire, aim. Just start doing it. Just start doing it. The cost is low. Put it out there. See if people respond to it. Keep on keeping on. It's a fun thing to do. It's kind of journalism. It's kind of conversation. It can be so many things. So it's very worth it. What is the name of his podcast? Can we plug it?
It's called Obrazi, which he says in Bulgarian means faces and images. It's a play on words. And he's got a link here actually to his SoundCloud. And so in the show notes, we'll put the link to his SoundCloud. And I believe his name is pronounced Damien, but I'm not 100% sure. That's how he signs it. So Damien, thank you so much, of course, for this great, wonderful fan email. It really was terrific to read. And we're excited that you've created a podcast. And anyone who has interest in checking out your Bulgarian cinematography podcast, they should 100% go to the link in the show notes and check it out on SoundCloud. It's called obrazi.
I know, I'll check it out. Although if it's in Bulgarian, I probably won't be able to make heads or tails of it.
Yeah, I will go listen to it as well too, but I have a feeling that I'm linguistically challenged in this regard. So, but I'll check it out regardless. I'll give them an extra download.
For sure.
Anyway, so Ben, close focus today. What's going on in the world?
Well, I wanted to talk about something that really kind of blew my mind. For those of us who are Star Wars fans with Disney Plus, we've been enjoying all of the Mandalorian and looking out for the future of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. And in the middle of that, we got the Book of Boba Fett. And on paper, Boba Fett seems like a character who'd be great in his own series. Hadn't really been getting into it. I've really been trying. It's not a bad show. It just wasn't like really grabbing me the way the Mandalorian did. And I think that the answer that we would all come to is because it has no Baby Yoda in it. Grogu was the thing that kind of kept us going. So I don't know how this is going to ultimately play into the Book of Boba Fett, but they basically just did a 2-episode arc that was just the Mandalorian. No Boba Fett in either of the episodes. 2 episodes. And the second episode featured a training montage of just slightly older than Return of the Jedi era Luke Skywalker training Grogu, training the Baby Yoda. And it was pretty phenomenal leap beyond the Luke Skywalker that we all saw in the season finale of the last season of The Mandalorian, which looked kind of stiff and plasticky and not that great. Well, so it turns out that there was a YouTuber who does deepfakes who took that footage and built a deepfake with real Mark Hamill and blew their minds. And so for this, they hired him to come in and do it all with deepfake technology, which in itself is quite cool. And when you look at it, is it 100% convincing? I would say not 100 and beyond all uncanny valleys convincing. But I'd say if I didn't know that that was a digital person or a digital face, because they have an actor acting out the role, I wouldn't question it. It's pretty damn close to lifelike. But here's the craziest thing of all to me, was that Mark Hamill did not voice it. They used an application called Respeecher, and they fed Mark Hamill's ADR from Return of the Jedi, and also he had been in a Star Wars radio play playing Luke Skywalker, and so they got a bunch of like his audio from that time and fed it in, and basically, as far as I can tell in my limited research, Respeecher is like deep fake for people's voices. So they were able to take this actor's performance, the actor who was standing in for Luke Skywalker, and they were able to map Mark Hamill's facial expressions onto him and put him in the correct lighting and everything, and it looked pretty good on my 4K television. And then in addition to that, I had assumed that they brought Mark Hamill in to do all the lines. Apparently Mark Hamill did not set foot into a recording studio to do any of the lines. I'm assuming they just used the other actors' lines, and then Respeecher synthesizes a Mark Hamill voice reading off of the original actor's performance, which is awesome and also kind of creepy. What do you think?
Yes, I agree. Both awesome and creepy. And I'm with you. I'd say that it was 95 to 98% right for the deep fake look. I was going to say they look remarkably good. But I will say that I noticed they didn't do a lot of motion. The Mark Hamill in this is very, very still. And I have a feeling that it was probably much harder to get what they need to have happen with a lot of motion or a lot of action or anything like that. So good on them for having a story where, the Mark Hamill character doesn't need to move around very much. But also the voice, it wasn't quite right. But it was, again, so damn close that it's like, yeah, for all intents and purposes, it was better than hiring a sound-alike, having someone overdub. I think that Mark probably could have overdubbed and sounded pretty close to the way he should have sounded himself. But even then, he's an old man now compared to when he made those. So would have been some differences.
His voice is different. I wonder if he could have pulled it out, though, because Mark Hamill has become one of the most in-demand voice actors who ever lived.
It's true.
So I wonder if he could just turn on young Mark Hamill.
Probably.
Even a great actor like Robert De Niro would probably have a hard time pulling out young Robert De Niro voice. But Mark Hamill, probably. But I also kind of feel like if you look at it as the technological challenge that they put in front of themselves, they kind of met it. And I feel like one of the only giveaways to me that something was up was just in the way they used coverage. It felt like when I was watching it was like, well, they're really not staying on Luke Skywalker for a line that probably ordinarily they would. But I also kept thinking, like, if I can accept this literal puppet Grogu as a living creature, which I do,
then you can totally accept.
Yeah, I can roll with a slightly. It's like the uncanniness of the uncanny valley became like 10% of what I'm used to. I mean, even think about like Tron Legacy, which was like what 10, 11 years ago.
Oh yeah,
with young Jeff Bridges.
It blows it away.
Which in itself, that was kind of a revolutionary thing that they did, and I felt like it was not a 100% successful in youthening. Or Rogue One, where they recreated Peter Cushing and also young Carrie Fisher.
That's right.
Not entirely convincing, not terrible. Like you kind of roll with it, but I feel like the suspension of disbelief was so much less than it's ever been, and you kind of figure like this is kind of the nature of what they've been doing with these Star Wars series. When you think about like with the Unreal Engine location thing that they've been doing, where it's like almost all where they're shooting in the volume, as Greg Fraser told us about. It's like they are pushing technology, but they're pushing it in television where the budgets are lower and the schedules are shorter, and they're able to still kind of pull out the stuff that is better than what you see in a lot of feature films. I just thought it was noteworthy, and it's a trend that I'm sure we're going to see more of. Like, how long before we see Marilyn Monroe pop up in something? I mean, all it takes is an actor's estate to be okay with it. And you could have dead celebrities, or you could have younger versions of living people out the wazoo. And I feel like it's more impressive than The Irishman. It's more impressive than every time I've seen this technology used, and we've all seen it a bunch of times. This is probably the best version of it I've ever encountered.
I mean, there's all these fake voice programs for composers and stuff out there, like the Vocaloids and stuff like that, for someone who really wants to get into trying to, who can't sing but wants to create digital voices and singing. I can only imagine what the near future is going to hold for that sort of thing too, because you're going to be able to deep fake AI, machine learning, all sorts of audio in ways that's probably going to be so much better than the visual counterparts and so much faster, depending on what it is, that it's not only going to be, can you trust what you see? Can you trust what you hear? And the answer to probably both of those things will be no. So if you weren't there...
You've been saying that for a long time, and I've been on the other side being like, look, my eye can tell when the stuff is fake. And I feel like we're getting closer and closer to when it will be harder to pick apart. And the real question is, I don't know what the name of this phenomenon is, but like think about the first time you saw Jurassic Park and how amazing the effects looked. And then like 5 years later, watch it again and go like, that all looks like CGI. I wonder if 5 years from now we'll be like, my eye just can tell that it's a deep fake.
No. I don't think that's the case. And here's the thing, because when Jurassic Park came out and people went, oh, wow, this is really amazing, no one actually 100% was like, that looks real. And I know I wasn't. And that, the teenage version of myself sitting in that theater did not go, that looks real. That looks great. And it certainly looked great, better than other CGI. I would say all CGI probably up until that point. But watch it 2 or 3 times. The first time you see it, you're not expecting it. Oh my God, this is incredible. Dinosaurs are running past. You go back and watch it a couple times. You go, yeah, especially if you look at it critically. There was a lot of people who said, no, it doesn't look real. It still looks great. And we're getting to the point now, though, where it does look real, and it's really hard to tell.
Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting, though. And I mean, I feel like we all think about the nefarious uses of this kind of stuff, but I also always look at the filmmaking uses for it.
Sure.
And how filmmakers can, like, if you set out to make something and you knew you were going to deep fake stuff, so you were able to collect all the data on the actor that you wanted to use or whatever. And I mean, this is a perfect example. You have permission to do it. You're able to extend stories, in this case, a story from 35 years ago. And you're able to, without really asking that much of the audience in terms of suspension of disbelief, you're able to keep that story intact and alive. And I don't know. I don't see a downside to it from a filmmaking standpoint. From you decide to hoax something with like political figures or something like that, the world's about to get very confusing.
I predict that there's going to be someone who comes along and says, we're going to, redo Clerks with James Dean and Alan Rickman. it's going to be like they're gonna deep fake them through these.
I want that movie right now, and if someone's listening to this and they can do this deep fake stuff, I want the James Dean, Alan Rickman Clerks. That's all day long.
And, that's sort of what's been happening with deepfake on YouTube with certain scenes with Jim Carrey replacing,
Jack Nicholson in The Shining.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So people doing scenes and stuff like that. But as it gets easier and better and more convincing, I mean, the mashups and the capabilities, it's, the sky's the limit. Who knows what will happen?
Dang. Well, I got to learn how to use those programs. Anyway, let's go ahead and get to our interview with Linus Sandgren.
The Cinematography Podcast interview.
So I am here today talking transcontinentally. You're in Sweden, right?
Yep, that's true.
That's amazing. With Linus Sandgren, cinematographer who is, I believe, going to get some Oscar love from, if not one, both amazing films, Don't Look Up and No Time to Die, the last Daniel Craig James Bond movie. Both are just amazing movies. Thank you so much for making the time to talk to us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So is it just an accident because No Time to Die had a delayed release because of COVID that both of these movies are kind of hitting at the same time and both are, I think, aimed for the Oscars?
I think, you're right. It's like a delay on Bond, obviously, 1.5 years, basically, from the original release date. And Adam McKay's film had a quick turnaround. We shot it, we wrapped in March.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's both films are coming out at the same time, basically, but with a big delay.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, even though like theatrical is still a little tentative because of COVID, people are going back to the theaters, and No Time to Die was a huge theatrical hit. But it's got to be cool to have two movies in theaters. When you spoke to Ilya last time, you were at Camera Image, the festival that's heavily focused on cinematography in Poland. You were just about to go off and make No Time to Die, and No Time to Die. I kind of just want to ask, like, what was the pressure? Knowing that you were finishing up the Daniel Craig James Bond movies, what was the pressure? What was the excitement factor of kind of taking the helm of that and knowing that that was going to be the last one he did? And no spoilers in the podcast, but it's very much finishing that character's arc.
Right.
What was it like, kind of, and knowing that you had to like fill shoes that had been filled with people, obviously like Roger Deakins. I shouldn't say filling the shoes, but you were kind of stepping into the same role that had been handled by so many amazing cinematographers before you.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously a great honor, I think, to get to shoot one of the Bond films. And like you said, it's a challenge, obviously, and that's what is fun. I think it's fun to take on challenges, things they haven't done before, and things that may seem a little harder than normal is sort of great to do, I think, to challenge yourself. But it was with a great, joy I got into it rather than fear, because I was just so happy to be considered and to be, when I was talking with Cary, we had a great discussion about how he wanted to make the film, and I got very inspired by that. And I think every time you make a film, you always have to think about each project for what it is, try to really focus on that we're making this film and not think so much about what's been there before or how other people did it. It's more about like, what does this story ask for? And if you try to always start in that end, it's sort of the other things sort of disappear a little bit. Of course, it is a big responsibility to carry sort of the flame and make something just as great as the other ones. I look up to these filmmakers who did the other Bonds ever since the beginning. I was very inspired, as a teenager watching, especially Roger Moore's films, but also Sean Connery, obviously, I saw on TV and whatever, and onward. It was very inspiring. But the focus became right away very much on just like with any film, like what does this story ask for, and I tried to break it down in few words in the beginning between me and the director to sort of try to find our path or how, and slowly you sort of build your language together. And once you have your language and you feel confident with that, it's about the execution and that part. But I think in prep, you sort of carry responsibility with so many other people as well. And as long as you feel like you're aligned in the group, you feel strong, it feels good.
Well, can you talk about sort of the creative process that you and Cary went through with it? Because it feels very much a piece with the other Daniel Craig movies, but it also, I feel like it functions amazingly just as a standalone film. You know, it even does something that I've never seen a Bond movie do, which is it opens on a scene that Bond has nothing to do with. Bond's not even, I mean, maybe there are other ones, but it's like, it's not a James Bond scene. It's setting something else completely up. It kind of pulled the rug out from under me immediately, which I know is sort of his storytelling style with, you know, things like True Detective. But you talk about like how you constructed the look and the way you wanted to lens it, how to make it like other Bonds, how to make it unlike other Bonds, how to make it its own thing.
Right. So exactly, the focus really, I think, was on making it our own Bond. Like, let me phrase it this way. I mean, we talked about it recently, actually, at Camera Image, me and Cary, that Cary doesn't really have necessarily a style that he purposefully tried to adapt to his films. It's not like every film you see looks like a Cary Fukunaga film. He definitely has sort of a taste, right, and a language and a way of processing how he processes his sort of projects, and that becomes significant, or like it becomes obviously a Cary Fukunaga film. But what I kind of mean is that he doesn't like always shoot anamorphic, or he doesn't always like tell the story in a certain way. It's all based on the script, and then obviously with his taste. And I have a similar approach. I think part of what I really like when I take on a new project is to hopefully find the story and the script that I haven't really done before. Because I kind of don't like to repeat myself in a way where you always have your look, or you always shoot, you know, anamorphic or whatever, like, or I just like to do it this way. And I like to take on new projects. And that's why actually part of that with Bond too was a completely new challenge for me with so much, you know, action and a bigger film. But I think, so what we looked for here was one part was obviously the story that was actually being written as we were prepping, because I came on just a month after Cary, and Cary, you know, rewrote the script completely with the writers. And the storyline that we had was the same as, you know, the arc of his character, what happens through the story in rough terms, and that you had sort of the characters were there and what was going to happen throughout the film, more or less. But he had to write the script from start. And I think this idea about presenting Madeleine's childhood in the beginning of the film came with Cary wanting to start the film that way in order to establish, which is obviously very important for the film itself. And that's one of the parts where you don't consider how did they do it before in the other Bond movies. Let's do it that way, or let's not do it that way. It wasn't about that. It was about you look at it as a separate story, and very important for the story is the relationship between Safin and Madeleine, and how that affects the film. So that's why I think people who hasn't seen Bond films before, that has seen No Time to Die, I think they can agree that this film is just its own film. It has its own story, and it could just as well be a story about any person that is not Bond as well.
Yeah. But I think if you've never seen a James Bond movie, you could watch this movie and it would make total sense to you. It's totally self-contained in a way that most of them are not. But then on the other hand, I think Daniel and Barbara and Michael, the producers, as well as Cary, very much wanted to also bookend Daniel Craig's character, starting with Casino Royale, and how in Spectre threads were kind of loose. And they wanted to explain the whole storyline between Daniel's Casino Royale and No Time to Die being sort of the final and very much sort of just bookending the whole chapter of Daniel Craig. So that was also important in the writing. Another thing that Cary then discussed with me a lot was the sort of expectations that we have on a Bond film is that it should be entertaining. It should be sort of a joyride for the audience, that we can go through a film and feel like it's one long big adventure, right? Then we start to discuss sort of themes and keywords, which to me is really important as a cinematographer. I think it's so hard sometimes, I think, to think about like, what should the look be on this film? It's like, how do you determine that, right? And I feel like I always start with the most simple words between me and the director. I'm like asking the director to give me some words, or I could also propose words from the script. Like, for example, it could be loss, right? Or grief, or death, or things
things that matters for the story. It may not matter for the entire story, or it may not matter everywhere. And then you can position them in the sort of storyline and say, like, in the beginning, it's like horror, and then it's like funny or comedy, some other part. The cool thing with the Bond film is that I think it has all kinds of emotions, right? You have everything from horror, and you have action, and you have love, and you have the grief and loss in this film, and you have comedy, and there's so many also sort of genres that you fly through in a Bond movie. And I think they have more or less of this in different Bond films, right? Some actors brought out much more comedy and wittiness and silliness, and not so much of the seriousness perhaps, and others has more of the serious tone. And that was very much for Cary. He wanted the film to have all of it, but in a good balance. We sort of first create a language. What is the language in the film? And then how does each scene get affected visually? And if you think about it, just thinking about like the beginning of the movie, the beginning is in the icy snow in Norway, right? And it was very important it didn't look like postcard, pretty wintry images, which it could have done, right? Because it's Norway in winter. It could look beautiful, like you're out skiing and you have that sunny, beautiful, still, no wind, and just romantic blue skies, white snow. But that was going to feel like very isolated, lonesome, a house in the middle of nowhere, very far from any police or anyone that could save you. And then also an eerie tone. So because the scene is, like a horror film scene, we very much worked with monochromatic gray skies and icy bluish tones in order to sort of make that part of the scene scary. And then once she goes in the water, right? And then you go into the action sequence in Matilda the next day, and it's harsh, bright daylight and sun, which creates a very contrasty look in the city. Yeah, so I think there's a combination of things there, but it's really driven by the emotions in the script, I think, in from my point of view. And this just happens to be a more heartbreaking story.
Well, you brought up something that I think that really piqued my interest, and I'd love to hear more about it, and if it's something that you do on every movie. But your discussion about kind of going through and putting markers for emotions per scene or per sequence or per act or whatever. How do you track that? How do you create that? How do you track that? How does that how do you, especially on something like a Bond movie where it's like, I don't know what your schedule's like, but it's like one day you're in Italy, the next day you're in London. How do you keep your head where you're supposed to be in the script? I think that challenge always seems extremely difficult, and everyone solves it differently.
Right. But I think it's something I do in prep, like it's the first thing I do in order to find the language. It's like, what cameras are we going to shoot on? I don't know. I need to know those words first, like the themes of the film and the feeling that we're after, because it would make a huge difference. What format, what lenses, all of that sort of comes, that language that we finally nail into a narrow tunnel is based on the script always for me.
Well, let's talk about Don't Look Up, which is, you brought up the comedy in your James Bond movie. To me, feels more like, the comedy in John Carpenter's The Thing, where you have,
Yeah.
characters who are acknowledging
Yeah.
the irony of their situation, but it's a
Right.
very serious situation through the whole thing.
Yeah.
But with Don't Look Up, that is just straight up satire. And it's radically different, and it's got a radically different look. So talk a little bit about like what made that different and what attracted you to working on honestly a wild satire. It's really funny and it's striking looking, but it's obviously very different looking than a Bond film or La La Land or a lot of the other kinds of stuff that you do.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love Adam McKay's work. I think he's a very interesting director. The script was as funny as the film. I think it was very clear, like what Adam wanted to make with this film. And obviously the theme being really a comment on us today, like mankind today, and how we lack the ability to communicate with each other. And we are very much obsessed with, social media and all that stuff that sort of deflect us from the actual reality. And which matters. And in this case, the reason he wrote the film was as a reaction to how the world have reacted to the global warming problem, So he wrote it a little bit while back, and then it's been sort of rewritten throughout the process of the last years. But I thought it was, I right away felt like I couldn't stop reading it, and it was like a terrific and terrible story at the same time. It's like funny, it's super hilarious, but also horrific is what I was going to say. It's like horrific and hilarious.
It's about global warming, but it's hard to watch it and not think about COVID as well. Just
totally.
How people's agendas hijack the actual solution that could save lives.
Always. That's the terrible thing with like how it works. So it felt like an important film, a really important film actually, and hilarious. So I jumped on. I thought I was very excited, and it was great to work with Adam. He's a very visual director and has lots of ideas. But when I came on, I think one of the first things I thought of was that it being, a political thriller on one hand, and then it's a satire, obviously, and there's lots of comedy and laughter in the film for the audience. So I felt actually that it was very much important for the base visuals to rather feel like it was a political thriller. Because the comedy would anyway come through, So what we wanted to sort of do was to find a language where the visuals was sort of like, hey guys, this is a serious matter. Let's really take care of this. And then all the satire comes with the craziness of how the people around them react to this fact and ignores it. And the comedy comes sort of by itself in the writing. So, and Adam loved that idea too. But then there's this other aspect, which is that it was kind of important for Adam to create a contrast between the truth in the story and the lies, or like the artifice and the reality, or like the truthful reality and the artificial counterpart, which would be the media and the social media. And then you have the true, what is really happening. That was going to be told in a serious way, in a peculiar way, with the anamorphic 35 cameras. When things sort of hit the fan and got even more suspenseful in dialogue scenes, we could like dolly to create tension, like with the dolly moves. But also we went a lot to longer zooms, like for practical reasons, we actually didn't, for light really, we didn't go to anamorphic zooms. So we went for spherical zooms, like 300 mil, we could be at 300 mil in dialogue scenes in order to compress the shots. And so that was sort of an extension to our language, but it was still related to the language. And the other side of the truthful sort of storytelling, which was the 35 millimeter, we had another camera setup, Penelope, Atom Penelope with a 40 millimeter macro that I could grab at any moment, that when we felt that now the lead characters of the film in general, it would be the lead characters would feel like really nervous or really tense, and it would be a sweaty moment. Then I would go in and be like inches from their eyes, right? Like when Leo realizes that the comet is coming and his calculations are wrong, right, I'm in there with a macro 40 on a spherical macro 40 handheld, like inches from his eyes, like really close, annoyingly close, because he's terrified at this moment. So it felt like you needed to be in there even more real, even more emotional and real. That would be like going even closer to them. So basically, it's like that theory of like the closer you are physically, the closer you actually are to the character emotionally too. And then we could step back to the longer lenses, and we would also film behind the cameras, like in Network, right? In Network, for example, you see a lot of shots like the film camera, we are like seeing a lot of monitors, so we can see the sort of other images in the image. And so we did that as well, like in the TV studios and stuff, we would go back behind the scenes sort of and see reality, but we see the artificial world in frame, right? We filmed the artificial world. And so then the contrast then was the artificial world, which would be partly like the Daily Rip is like a morning show, and it's like brightly lit, bright colors, and the settings on those video cameras were like very colorful. And you will see in the film, we discussed whether we liked this or not, but we discussed and we decided to intercut between film footage, that is the real world, and you cut to a shot and it's like the fake news world, right? Like we have you're in the TV studio camera images, even if it's 2.4, still it would still be like a more colorful and bright image, and that would be the TV footage. on top of that, we have like cell phone images, right? Like cell phone footage. And there's like a whole mix of media. And then we had people all around the world filming people looking up. We had asked people to film themselves on cell phones in different places around the world to expand our universe so that we felt like it took place all over the world. And then we also went to film in Peru, and we went to film in Hawaii, and to shoot, like people in various parts of the world. We shot this film during COVID and the second wave, right over Christmas.
Oh man, yeah.
And so, yes, we had a huge challenge to work with the extras, because this film had to have a lot of extras, in the film for the story. But
and you're making it before there's even a vaccine available. Like there's no way to there's no way to prevent it. I actually got COVID. So, my whole family got COVID in January in LA. So
yeah. No, so exactly. So it was a Netflix project, right? And they were very good at, keeping us safe, and they took huge efforts into the safety of the crew, and everyone stayed safe. We never stopped shooting because they tested every day. It was amazing actually how they handled it, but the downside was just like creatively that we had to be very creative with how to shoot it to look like scenes where there's lots of people in the shots, and you couldn't really have any people. So I forgot now exactly how many we had, if we had 20 or 30 extras to work with at any given moment, but those were altered. So they were sequestering for 2 weeks or something, and then we had them for 2 weeks. They were in a bubble, and we had them for 2 weeks, and we had to use them in various scenes, the same people. And then we altered them, so we got new people after 2 weeks. But those people within that sort of shooting frame, we had to use those people for various scenes. So I bet that you could like find the same actors in different scenes if you look.
And just the logistics of that just melt my brain too. Just like that, like figuring out how
exactly
to handle it.
That is the tricky part. It was tricky, but that also caused us to shoot a little more long lensy for those scenes, because by compressing the image, we could put them still 6 feet apart, but like in a long line away from camera in a slice of the image. So, and then there was VFX methods too, where we just moved people around and we shot plates. So we took our time to like get plates of all these people in different places, like for the concert scene, for example. And we just we just plated that with lots of same people just moving around in the frame. So it was fun, because it was like the film is so wild, so we kind of had the freedom, I think, in one way to depart from reality as well in the craziness. But the main important factor was that it had to feel still real, because it is, a comment on a serious matter. And again, that was sort of the visual idea behind the film, while Bond is more of a heightened reality, sort of escapist adventure, right? So it has definitely another tone that focuses more on romanticizing things, and Don't Look Up is not romanticizing things. It's like telling the truth, I think was the idea. So that is sort of the difference for me between the films.
Well, cool. I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you again so much for coming back on the show. Before we go, is there anywhere online where people, you don't need a real, people just need to go see some of these, amazing movies that you've shot. But like, do you have a presence online, a website, Instagram, any place where you interact with people?
Yeah, I have Instagram. It's Linus Sandgren _DP. But I must be honest and say I haven't been there in a while, but that's the easiest way. Or also my website is not updated.
No DP's website is updated. Everybody we talk to is like, yeah, I got to get back to that. That's cool. Well, you were busy making all the movies, so it's okay. Thank you.
It's been a busy year. Yeah,
for real. Well, thank you so much for coming back on the show, and I can't recommend both of these movies highly enough to everybody, not just for your work, but they're both just really amazing movies. So again, thank you for coming on the show again.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much.
So that was Linus Sandgren. Can't wait to have him on for whatever he shoots next, man. He's just an amazing guy, great insight, and if you haven't already, definitely check out No Time to Die and Don't Look Up.
Yes, indeed. Hey, Ben, guess what time it is now?
What time would that be?
10:04. No, what it is it's time to pay our bills for the podcast. We have all kinds of bills. hosting fees and all of the staff that go into making this thing a reality. And we have to thank our good friends over at ARRI for helping to make that happen. ARRI, makers, purveyors of fantastic camera technology systems, optical systems, lighting systems. But I want to talk about their camera rental department. Did you know ARRI rents cameras too? They actually have rental facilities.
I guess I kind of did that. I did know that because I know that they have some gear that you cannot buy.
Yeah, and actually today, it's kind of funny jumping forward because 13 years ago when I started Hot Red Cameras, I met a young guy who was working at a company called Able Cine. His name is Andrew Shipsides, and Andrew, at the time I knew him, he was Andy, but now he's Andrew. Andrew is now the president of North America ARRI Rentals, and he's been posting on his Instagram the progress of their new building in New York, and he's been showing these progress shots, these photos of a 3,600 square foot space for events, demos, testing, shooting, and more. And I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm really glad that he's sharing and posting this because ARRI is, over the last few years, they totally redid their LA office. They moved to a huge new space for rentals, and I know it's fantastic. I've been there and I've done some stuff. I know they're redoing the New York building. They also have this building that they sponsored. They built it, on the property of the ASC Clubhouse. ARRI is really, really just completely kind of like doing a major revamp of all of their stuff, all of their big rental places in Los Angeles and New York as well. So it's really interesting to see what's going on. Anything that is an ARRI product, of course, you can rent from ARRI. That's kind of like the idea there. So the Alexa 65 and the Alexa Mini LF and all that sort of stuff. ARRI has rental facilities for all that, and I want to give a shout out to them and to Andrew for doing such a bang up job and growing with the company and making it sort of the thing it is today. So if you are interested in ARRI equipment, you could certainly go have a conversation with the fine folks over at ARRI Rentals and see what they're all about.
Awesome.
And now, short ends.
All right, so Ben, that leads us to our short end time of the show. What is your obsession this week?
Well, the first half was definitely deep faking of Luke Skywalker, but the other thing that's kind of been holding me in thrall is this new documentary. It's a 4-part documentary on Showtime called We Need to Talk About Cosby, directed by W. Kamau Bell, who is an amazing comedian, and he's about our age, so he grew up, as we both did, with Bill Cosby, kind of as an ever-present dad figure on television. And the documentary is brilliant because I feel like there's a temptation, like for instance, not that I didn't like it, but there was that documentary about Woody Allen that was on HBO not that long ago. And that was a really good series, but I feel like it was mostly making the case about how Woody Allen really did the things he was accused of. And in this case, I feel like the burden of proof is lower for Cosby, because with Woody Allen, you have, basically a very finite set of accusers. And with Bill Cosby, you have dozens of people who all have the same story. And they definitely go into that. But what I think W. Kamau Bell has done brilliantly as well is to kind of weave in all the things that made Bill Cosby great. I mean, like, he'll just play bits of his stand-up and you're like, yeah, he was a brilliant stand-up comedian. And for instance, stuff I didn't know, like when he was making I Spy in the 1960s, there were no black stuntmen who were doubling actors on TV shows when you had black actors doing stunts. And Bill Cosby insisted that they hire a black stuntman and kind of got that going for the entire stunt industry, like kind of changed it. There are all these things about representation and inclusivity and him kind of breaking down barriers. And then interspersed are these stories of the horrendous things he did, firsthand accounts from the people who they happen to. And I feel like they go just far enough that you get the idea without like needing a trigger warning every 5 minutes. You're not going to need PTSD therapy afterwards just from hearing it, although the people who live through this are clearly living in, like they're living with a real trauma that happened to them. And what's brilliant about it is that there's this tendency to be like, so-and-so is all good or so-and-so is all evil. And if you go on Twitter right now and say a declarative statement about Bill Cosby, a million people will come on to defend him. They'll just jump in your shit and start defending him. And also a lot of people will agree with you. And I feel like it's easy to say, assuming these reports are true, and I believe that they're true, that he needs to go away. Like, he should be in jail, and it's a miscarriage of justice that he was let out of jail. However, I think it's also worthy to kind of show all the positive things that happened in our industry as a result of him, and how doors were opened for Black people in ways that they never had been before. I don't know. It's such an interesting and complex documentary, and I feel like Kamau Bell has like perfectly threaded the needle, which I feel like you don't want to go in one direction and make a hagiography about Bill Cosby and talk about him being a wonderful guy, but I also feel like you can't talk about him without talking about the way the industry changed because of him in ways that made the world better, but then also acknowledge that in aggregate none of it matters because, you know, he's basically a serial rapist.
I know that the Cosby documentary just had its premiere at Sundance, and it generated a lot of buzz, and it's really interesting to see or to hear the reactions from people now that it's over on Showtime. I have not seen it yet, so I get to live vicariously through you and from our producer Alana who watched it as well, who gave me the report. But an actor who played a character that was really associated with so many people as wholesome and as like the Jello guy, and then to find out that he's this incredible sex monster, and then to do this deep dive. I have a feeling that there's going to be quite a few people who kind of feel like they already know the story and they don't need to watch it, but I don't know. We'll find out.
I knew the story, and I still wanted to watch it because I like the way W. Kamau Bell puts his ideas together. I was interested in his take. And I think that it's the kind of thing where I feel like he's saying, yes, acknowledge all the terrible things he did, but you can't also leave all the good things he did on the table. Like, it's easy to look at somebody like Harvey Weinstein and be like, yeah, the world would have been a better place had that guy never been in any kind of power. He didn't make the world a better place for anyone. He just distributed movies and produced movies that people wanted to see, and that's about it. But with Cosby, there's like, and again, I'm not in any way saying that anything should have happened to this guy besides he should have gone to jail. He probably should have gone to jail decades before he did. Definitely should have. I mean, like, the earliest accusations against him are from the 60s. So this guy was bad news in so many ways, but I guess that's what makes it interesting, is that he can be a horrible person who somehow managed to do a lot of good somehow. And also, I should say, Showtime has just been killing it this year, man. Between the new Dexter, Yellow Jackets, and this, like, they're putting out some of the most interesting content. There I am using that word.
Using that word.
They're putting out some of the most interesting.
We need a swear jar for content.
Every time I say content, you can just walk over here and punch me in the nose.
Ooh. Ben Katz should be adding a sound effect right now. That sound.
Yeah. No, but Showtime's just been killing it. Like, they've been doing really, really great work. And I feel like Yellow Jackets became a show that everyone was talking about, which is why I started watching it, And the new Dexter I was probably going to see no matter what. And this is something that's like, it's a little ballsy, It's a little, I don't feel like as a network they're like risking anything by putting it out, but I feel like it's a somewhat controversial subject. There are people who will defend Bill Cosby to the end, and I think they're misled. But it's interesting to see this whole story done with this much care. So, Ilya, now the time it has come, and what is your short end?
Well, it may feel like somewhat of a cop-out, but I have to do Ozark again, because now I've watched all of the season 4, which turns out that has been released. They're broke it up into 2 parts. So here it is. I binged through it, and then voila, what happens? There's still going to be like 4 more episodes that are going to come out at some point in the future. I don't know when, I don't know where, they're not saying. And of course, they start off this whole arc with sort of like a flash forward, and then everything else is sort of like, I don't know, flashback or something. So I think they did a really great job, kind of tying up what loose ends there were. But at the same time, now I'm just feeling sort of crushed. Like, I don't know why why I'm going to have to have a hiatus before going back to the show to get the final 4 episodes or final whatever it is. And anyway, I love the show. I don't want it to run forever. I want it to have a great ending. And if having to do it this way is one thing, but supposedly an executive producer has been talking to the media and saying like, oh no, we wanted to make sure everyone could really catch up and blah, 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 and really build up the end. So I don't know. We'll see what it is.
I bet, I don't want to speculate about something I don't know anything about, but my guess is the pandemic might have played a part in that. Like it might have slowed down production a little bit, and they weren't able to do the whole season in one fell swoop.
Yes, that could very well be. But definitely I feel like it's tight, and they did a really good job of, I would say there's not as many extras and cast. It definitely looks like, if ever there was a season that was produced during the pandemic, it's this one. But no, it's just as taut and just as entertaining. And boy, I guess now I can't wait for the real finale of Ozark, which I guess is coming at some unknown time.
Cool. Well, yeah, I need to start watching it. I started watching the first episode on one of those parents of a toddler days when I just didn't have any attention span. And I was like, I'm not in any place to watch this now. So I did it with that. And I also did it with Archive 81, which I definitely want to see as well.
All right. Well, get on that.
Yeah. In my spare time.
Yeah. It's not like you're looking after a kid or anything.
No, that's true.
Anyway, hey, Ben, where can people find you? Where, if they want to connect with you, follow you on the socials, all that stuff.
The best place, obviously, as I keep saying, is the Facebook group Needs a Werewolf. Please come and join us and pitch your werewolf ideas. But also go to benrockonline.com and you can find all my socials. I recently did kind of like a very minor cosmetic upgrade of some of the flat art that I had on there. But yeah, go on there. You can find my LinkedIn, my Twitter, my Facebook, all that stuff. Friend me on any and all of those things, and let me know that you are a listener to the podcast. How about yourself, Ilya? Where can people find you?
Monday through Friday, you can find me over at Hot Rod Cameras, although I was there this weekend as well, too. Most people don't know that we have an on-call sort of like phone line, so that actually on the weekends, if someone calls, we can't do too much for you, but we can be a friendly voice and try to offer you some advice, or maybe let you know what we might have in stock, or what we can get back to you first thing on Monday. So it turns out a whole lot of people wanted some ARRI Codex readers this weekend, and I got multiple phone calls for it. So tomorrow morning, I'll be returning some calls and letting people know if their ARRI Codex card readers are available.
Very cool. Very cool.
So anyway, Hot Rod Cameras, hotrodcameras.com. That's where you can find me. You can also find me in all the other sort of usual socials. It's at Ilya Friedman. And of course, you can go to our website, Cam Noir, and there'll be links to Ben and to me and to everything else.
Excellent. Well, who do we need to thank this week?
Hey, let's thank Kay Zalatrachi, making all the music that everyone heard in this episode. And we got to figure out a time to get him on the show.
We still do. Well, and I know Kay's is deep in post on an episode. I don't know how much I'm allowed to say, but it was an episode of something that he directed. Fiction episode. I'm just going to leave it right there. So maybe when he's ready to reveal that to the world, we can have him on. Let's also thank Ben Katz, our editor, who hopefully we didn't make his job too hard today, but Ben, who edits our interviews. Whenever we're getting ready to interview someone, the first thing I tell them is these interviews are edited. And so we are trying to make you sound smart. And if you want to rephrase something, just rephrase it. And Ben Katz will cut it out. Ben Katz making everyone sound like we're smarter than we really are.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate that.
Very much appreciated.
And let's thank Alana Cody, making sure that this show keeps going strong and that we have plenty of great episodes to come in the future. And Lord knows we do. As a matter of fact, I think we released 3 episodes last week. We started, just throwing in Sundance stuff and putting out some of the Sundance interviews. There's some really good stuff in there. And anyone who's interested in some of the big movies that came out at Sundance last week or the week before, now you've got a chance to hear us, or hear me in particular, talk to some of the creative teams. And
I got to talk to 2 of them.
Oh, I guess that's true. We both did, but I think I did 12 and you did 2. It was totally fair.
So yeah. Your statement was accurate.
That's okay. I'm not trying to Alexander Hamilton. You're here with the Federalist Papers. Oh, you didn't see Hamilton?
Aaron Burr? I know I've seen Hamilton. Yeah.
Well, Alexander Hamilton wrote like 57 of them, and everyone else who was involved wrote like a handful. So
you definitely did way more work on the Sundance front than I did. But
hey, next year, I'm really looking forward to you taking over next year. You can. Do it.
I mean, I think I'll be able to. My son will be like almost 5, and and maybe next year we can even go to Sundance again. Maybe
we can only hope. So
I feel like we're getting close. I feel like it's almost over.
I really hope so. I am so ready for it to be over. Really, really ready. So like everyone.
Yeah.
All right. So Ben, I think that's everything. I think that all that's left to do is sign off.
All right. Well, then, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.